floor of the great Aiken-Rhett house. Through the dark, they advanced towards the primary entrance and the 3-story high marble stairwell. Both of them were fatigued from a long day of hard work and ready for sleep. Their intention was to complete one last piece of work, a routine request made by Sonatrol, company in charge of the Manson's security system. The massive structure stood dark and quiet, framed only by stars and a moonless sky. Originally constructed in 1817, the Aiken-Rhett occupies the length of an entire city block. All but 2 basement rooms exist without electricity. Because preservationists have chosen to leave it unrestored, the house presents an unusually menacing aspect, even in daylight. At night, the Aiken-Rhett turns into a huge dead space, a towering black giant that dominates the entire neighborhood. That summer, Fava and Gibson measured the whole house, its every feature, including even the trim. Their work established an official historical American building survey. Up until this summer day, nothing out of the ordinary had transpired. But at 10 minutes to 10 p.m., Sonatrol monitors detected wind blowing through the 2nd floor ballroom. They notified Fava and Gibson and asked them to close the windows in that room before locking the doors for the night. After that, nothing more was ordinary. The young architects approached the central stairway. Upon stepping on the first stair, a shrill, high-pitched noise flooded their hearing. Both men covered their ears. When they reached the midpoint between floors, a loud, whirring noise shook the stairwell and grew louder from behind the door of the 2nd floor ballroom. As they approached the rattling door, the disparate sounds increased in pitch over a period of several seconds until both dropped tone and merged into one constant roar as loud as a freight train. When Gibson touched the doorknob, all sound and movement ceased. He opened the door to find a perfectly sealed room. No open windows, no wind blowing. Throughout the once magnificent ballroom, all was still and quiet. They walked past the louvered piazza doors, past the long gilded mirror centered against the far wall, and continued deep into the heart of the room. With eyes wide and shifting in all directions, neither of them spoke. Fava beamed his flashlight all around the room. Nothing was there. Then both men saw it, a distinct movement through the room. Something was there, not a reflection. They felt it glide by, then saw motion behind them in the mirror. Fava wheeled, casting his light around, again seeing nothing but wood floors and tattered wallpaper. Both men stood absolutely still. Coming from the direction of the mirror was the sound of sustained, heavy sobbing. As they turned, the sobbing stopped. But in that mirror glared an intense, wide-eyed old woman. Strands of her long white hair rose and snapped in a breeze that Fava and Gibson could not feel. She gathered energy into her face and body through a deep inhalation. She then put her hands to the sides of her head and bent into a scream so long and hard that her whole body shook. She wailed in absolute silence. Oh. The story behind that story is in the book. I believe that many of you know that they were the epitome, the Aiken family were the epitome of antebellum Southern opulence and an excessive lifestyle. I mean, they lived a lifestyle that would be difficult to even, that would be impressive now, but they went on buying trips to Europe and bought their chandeliers in Paris and their black marble fire. I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary, and they were people of power, and they entertained in that home the most influential and wealthiest people of their day. It was quite an extraordinary lifestyle. They owned plantations. They had many, many slaves, both in town and on the plantation. He was an inventive businessman. He was considered a great, great success in their life, and she was considered an absolute artist of entertainment. And she, socially, they lived quite an extraordinary life. As you know, in 1865, that opulent lifestyle came to a crashing halt. I was going to read. General William T. Sherman himself said that, quote, anyone who was not satisfied with war should go and see Charleston, and he will pray louder and deeper than any that the country may in the long future be spared of any more war, unquote. The Aiken-Rhett house was left standing, but the city really was in dire straits, and their lifestyle and their way of supporting themselves, as we know, was no longer. William and Harriet both lived for over 20 years after the end of the Civil War. And after William died in 1887, Harriet transformed the second floor ballroom, making it into a comfortable bedroom. After her death, Henrietta Aiken-Rhett, Harriet's daughter, locked the ballroom, and it remained sealed until 1974, like a time capsule, closed and unused for 82 years. It was in that room, in that ballroom, in the room where she spent the last few years of her life, that Fava and Gibson suspended their disbelief. We invite you to learn more about this and read. I am now going to let Simon tell you a story, and he is not going to read. He is going to improvise and use his storytelling skills to one of our favorite stories, which is the Joseph Ladd story, and it is also in The Ghost of Charleston, Julian's book. But Simon, I think you would like a little more space. Shall we move the chairs? Okay, let's do that. Let's move the chairs.
I am in an alley. I am transported back 300 years. Welcome to Philadelphia Alley. So called after the Great Fire of 1810, when the city of Philadelphia came to the aid of Charleston and helped to rebuild this area. Prior to that, it had many other names. Cow Alley, opposite where we're standing, were the livestock stockades, housing the cattle before they would go to the beef market, a city hall on the northeast corner of Broad and Meeting Street. It was also called Bloody Alley and Dueller's Alley. Many a duel was fought here in Philadelphia Alley. Now, the name of this story is called Echoes of Lament, or more simply put, The Whistling Ghost. Dr. Joseph Brown Ladd, as a young man in his early teens, grew up on his father's farm near Newport, Rhode Island. His family were from humble means, but Joseph was a dutiful son. He did his best to help. His body was behind the work, but his heart dwelt in another world, a world of art, science, and the love of poetry. Now, at first, Joseph's father was angered by his son's detachment from their reality, but he finally relented and allowed his ethereal son, Joseph, to go to the Redwood Library in nearby Newport 2 afternoons a week. And it was there that a fateful meeting occurred. As Joseph ambled up and down the aisles, he caught a glimpse of an enchantment. There she was, books in hand, the personification of beauty, Amanda, the love of his life. Now, Joseph continued to work on the farm and spend time with his beloved Amanda. As they made plans for a future together, Joseph made another plan, a plan that he hoped would cement his credibility. His father had agreed and helped engineer an apprenticeship to a Dr. Isaac Center in Newport. And for the next 4 years, Joseph worked hard to gain his doctorate. It was now he believed he could ask for Amanda's hand in marriage. But Amanda was an orphan from a wealthy family. Her estate was managed by an attorney. An unscrupulous attorney would entertain no idea of his charge in the hands of a mere doctor without a practice. Now, in October of 1783, Joseph found himself here in Charleston. The Revolutionary War had just ended. There were few doctors left to treat the populace. His services were desperately needed. As you can imagine, the good doctor was full of verve. He was ready to take on the world and, most importantly, secure passage for his beloved Amanda. Now, a man by the name of Ralph Isaacs, standing close to where the doctor stood at the stagecoach station, realizing him to be an out-of-towner and somewhat lost, offered his services. The two men took a carriage ride to the Rose Sisters' home on Church Street. They bonded, a friendship would ensue. Rose Sisters, both spinsters, treated Joseph as if he was their son. He would confide in them his hopes and dreams, particularly when it came to Amanda and them being reunited once they established a practice. And by all accounts, Joseph was happy here in Charleston. He could be heard whistling as he passed through the alley to his practice on Cumberland Street. He finally prospered. The Rose Sisters had opened many doors into high society for him. Now, as he believed, as a man with good standing and dignity, he could ask again for Amanda's hand in marriage. But fate has a way of playing its own hand. In the case of Joseph, fate was to play a cruel hand. The friendship between him and Ralph had deteriorated, Ralph being jealous of his prosperity. It all came to a head one night when the two of them attended a play. Joseph sat up in the box seat. Ralph had to sit amongst the commoners on the floor. And from this point on, Ralph went out of his way to disparage Joseph's good name. Something in him had turned, his ugly side had reared its head. Joseph was at a loss of what to do. His friends told him, as a gentleman, you must defend your honor because honor is everything. Well, defending your honor in those days meant challenging the perpetrator to a duel. It was arranged. Pistols were the weapons. Now, the night before the horror of the morrow, Joseph wrote this poem. Death, friendly death, may soon relieve my pain. Long shore he cannot be implored in vain. Soon the grim angel will restore my peace, soothe my hard fate and bid my sorrow cease, and tear Amanda's image from my heart. When deep oblivion wraps my mind in night, when death's dark shadows swim before my sight, will then Amanda? Ah, she will, I trust, pay the last tribute to my clay cold dust. Will sigh and say, there his last scene is over, who loved is mortal no love before. Now the dawn came early for Joseph. The Rose Sisters escorted him to the street. His friends brought him to the door. The two men were placed back to back and commenced their 21 paces. On the 21st pace, Joseph turned, raised his pistol to the sky, and fired. A gentleman, a preserver of life. Ralph Isaacs, not so, raised his pistol, leveled it at Joseph's head, dropped it further to his stomach, dropped it to his knees, and fired. Joseph was mortally injured. His friends carried him back to the Rose Sisters' home, where for 10 days he lay in delirious agony, pleading for them to send for Amanda. And they tried, but the attorney had her locked away. Finally, young Joseph succumbed to his wounds, but his spirit still lives on. A whistling sound could be heard in this alley, the Rose Sisters' home on Church Street, a man's voice pleading for his love to come, only to be silenced by a soft feminine, hush, they're here. And that is it.
Wonderful. The rearranging of the text. Thank you, Simon.
Absolutely wonderful.
That was really fun. We're used to hearing that out on the streets with when we go out. We love to tell the stories in place, whether in the Unitarian graveyard or in Philadelphia Alley. That one could also be told in other places too, right? So
It's such a lovely story.
extraordinary story. And it certainly goes into haunted history. We have been getting so many questions. I think we've been a little bit overwhelmed with the number of haunted history questions. I think we could have an hour of that. We're going to do some rapid fire ones and get to as many as we can. You all have some really great questions. This person says, are there any ghost dogs or hounds in Charleston? Which I think is a really fun question. And I have heard some really extraordinary ghost hound stories, particularly from Scotland. The Scottish seem to really like their ghost hound stories. And we have a book here called, it's extremely popular, and we struggle to keep in stock, but I believe we have some now and some on the way, Ghost Dogs of the South. And I recommend that. Those stories are really quite extraordinary. But I don't know of any documented historical dogs, those stories, even though it's kind of taken on a life of its own. Coogan's at Coogan's Porch, that is a fairly haunted location here in Charleston, a very popular story. Also in Julian Buxton's book, but these stories continue to happen, and there is a dog. His grave is there, and I believe that in an effort to just celebrate that and intrigue guests on tours, that there have been lots of stories told, and maybe more fiction than anything. But if somebody has their own stories, let us know. We would love to know about real stories of that. I personally know friends who have had animals who have come back to visit. Usually they're stories of a dog jumping on the bed, and they were certain that the dog was there after he had passed away, that they just felt that he was there, or brush up against his leg. So anyway, I believe that could be true, but we don't have any specific stories in this book or documents. But anyway, we're open to that. You can email us if you'd like. We'd love to share. So next question. I am curious to hear stories about the Charleston African American population. I am assuming that means ghost stories. We have a wonderful walking tour with author and professor Damon Fordham called Lost Stories of Black Charleston. And Damon recommends this book as far as folk tales go. And it's called The Doctor to the Dead, John Bennett. And this is a new version that just came out from the University of South Carolina Press with an extraordinary, with a wonderful introduction by Bill Eichenberger from the College of Charleston. And many of you, it's pretty gruesome and grotesque. And also, you read in her introduction, it's important to read the introduction to understand the context in which these stories were translated and transcribed. She wrote something, what did she say? Jill Eichelberger wrote, the Gullah people's accounts of ingenuity, humor, terror, mystery, and solidarity survive because of and despite Bennett's research and rewriting. I'll leave it at that, right? But Doctor to the Dead, right? One way to say it. Any documentation about the Church Street female ghost? And I am thinking that must be the Dock Street Theater ghost on Church Street. Yes, and the answer is there is not a lot of historical documentation of who she was. Julian wrote about her in his book, and he loves the story. It's a wonderful story. But there is a lot of documentation of people having experiences in the Dock Street Theater. It was once the Planters Inn. It was a very opulent hotel, and in its day, right across the street from St. Philip's Church, or within eye view, catty corner there. And anyway, so that is quite a haunted area, which actually brings me to something else. Someone said, this question said, what are the most haunted areas and neighborhoods of Charleston. Right? I think that you can ask for as many times you ask that question, you'll get a different answer. My thought was that it's 350 years since Charleston was founded. That's what we are celebrating right now. And that is a lot of living and dying. There have been wars and occupations and earthquakes, fires, collective love and loss. And I think most of the city is probably haunted.
Oh, I absolutely agree. You know, the spirit world just moves around us all the time. And, you know, I particularly experienced that in the Unitarian Church. Yeah, that is quite a profound experience.
That reminds me that when we first started having the ghost tours, the Ghost of Charleston tour leave from the bookstore, people would come in and ask me if they were going to see a ghost. And I would say, no, it's not like that. We tell stories and the story behind the story. But time after time after time, people showed us photographs or continue to show us photographs or tell us stories or experiences. And so my new answer, which is more accurate, is still a little vague, is it's not up to us. So yeah, that's my favorite answer. Let's see. Curious to hear, hold on, as time, this is a weird, interesting one. I think I'll read it exactly as they wrote it. As time moves on with history, are there any ghosts lurking in the area? I think that's what ghosts are. If so, do they bother the territorial claim of older ones? Interesting question.
No.
Well, I think you have to ask the ghost.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think everything is copacetic out there. I truly do. I mean, my experience being on the out there on the street night after night, doing my ghost stories, is that everything just moves around us. There's nothing. There's no aggravation. It's apparent. Everything just flows. We flow with it.
Well, I'm not going to ask the ghost personally. I don't do that. So I'll leave it at that. Someone has asked would like to know more about the Swordgate House on Legree Street when it was a girls' school. And that's actually a really amazing story. That is in here. Again, I think we might be running out of time. No, it's good. Oh, we can keep going. Okay, good. I got the go ahead to tell you a little bit more. So as far as the Swordgate House goes, I was going to look up and see where we have it here. It's the house on Legree Street, and it was it's where the elite of Charleston educated their daughters, and they learned French and Latin and how to be intelligent music, how to be intelligent worldly women. And there was the headmistress there is the one who was said to haunt the house. I think her name was Maria Whaley. There was a student. She was one of the wealthiest families, and it was a scandalous elopement. And the headmistress never got over it. She really felt that it was a shame on her school and also the reputation of her school, and that she had let the parents and her students and her girls down. And so she is seen with, if I can find I would love to read just the description of her. Oh, here it is. The description of her ghost. But her eyes are usually seen blazing. Where is it? Seen blazing as she walks the top floor where the girls slept in their dormitory. I don't see it now, but she is seen in full when she's having strong hauntings, pacing and walking up and down through the halls with her eyes absolutely piercing and lit like fire, scanning the room to make sure that no one is there to harm her girls. So it's pretty extraordinary.
Intense.
Yeah, a very intense,
Very intense.
kind of a frightening image. But I am trying to look. There's so many good ones here. Which are the most historical and factually accurate of the tour companies, in your opinion? I have a highly biased opinion.
So do I.
The best tours leave from the bookstore. And my other favorite thing to say is we literally wrote the book. Julian wrote the book, but we have the book. So The Ghost of Charleston, and if you want to bug him to write more, please do, because he has a wealth of news stories. I think you can't live in Charleston without having people tell you that they often start something with, well, I don't believe in ghosts, or I don't believe in spirits, and then they proceed to tell you about a haunting and their personal experience. So it's pretty incredible. And some of these are wonderful, the way that they've documented here in this book about people writing their letters and writing their stories. And it almost always begins and often ends with, but I don't believe.
Well, until you've been out there and you've experienced and you've fully opened up your senses, I think it's difficult. It's not an intellectual experience; it's a sensual experience, and it's not just the five senses; it's a deep sense. If you allow yourself to go into that deep sense, then things come to you.
Well,
Speak.
I think that's true. And just last night we had Scott Peoples and Michelle Van Paris here about their book about Edgar Allan Poe, and he certainly he has a connection here to Charleston, as we all love to celebrate. But he's truly one of the great writers, and Scott Peoples believes that it is more of an urban legend that Annabel Lee was written about Charleston. But I like to think that that there is that we are certainly part of the Kingdom by the Sea and that it's taken on a life of its own in its own way. So I'm hoping that Simon will end tonight by
Absolute pleasure for you. It was many, many a year ago in the Kingdom by the Sea. A maiden there lived whom you might know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child and she was a child in this Kingdom by the Sea. But we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee. With a love that the winged stars of heaven coveted her and me. Yes, this is the reason that long ago in this Kingdom by the Sea, a wind came out of a cloud, chilling my Annabel Lee, so that a high kingsman came and bore her away from me to shut her up in a sepulchre in this Kingdom by the Sea. Now the angels not half so happy in heaven went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know in this Kingdom by the Sea, that a wind came out of a cloud, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. Our love was stronger by far than the love of those older than me, many far wiser than we. And neither the angels in heaven above nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel. The moon never beams without bringing me dreams, the beautiful Annabel. And the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel. All the night tide I lay down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre here by the sea, the tomb by the sounding sea.